48 stitch unisex socks using number 4, otherwise known as worsted weight yarn, using the 48 slot cylinder that I recently had 3D printed for my antique auto knitter. This is the thickest yarn that I can succeed with on this machine, and to do so I need to use the large hook needles. They are actually really like mid-gauge needles, not like bulky needles, but they will handle this 8-ply sock yarn, whereas my regular needles frequently make mistakes if I try to do it with them. This yields a tube that's 9 inches in circumference, which works for medium-sized men's socks and some ladies' socks. I get 7.25 rounds per inch. This yarn comes in a 5.5 ounce ball. That's not enough for the larger socks in the range that this pattern will make, but there's plenty for a pair of smaller sizes of ladies' socks, even a surplus at times. So I know of 2 ways to eke out your yarn supply. One is make a pair of socks for a smaller foot as well as a pair of socks for the larger foot, and then the leftovers from the smaller foot can be moved over to the larger socks. The other option is what I'm doing here. Pick a complementary yarn and knit part of the sock in that yarn. I used the alternate yarn for the big hem. Now about that hem, normally I say knit about 20 rows and then hang the first row of the main yarn knitting. In this case, I started out trying that with a deeper hem, a 40-row hem, and I wasn't pleased at all. The machine did not feel happy about trying to knit off 2 sets of worsted weight stitches. So I changed the approach, and the actual socks are knitted with 50-row hems. But after knitting those 50 rows, we just changed yarns. Did not continue by hanging the hem, and finished the hem later, and that went much better. After 50 rows with the alternate yarn used as the hem, I pulled it through, knotting the 2 together, but just to allow for pulling through, and set the stitches up so that at the correct spot, this needle will knit the hem color, this needle will begin knitting the regular sock yarn. So here we go, pulling through the last of the sock top color. I've got the yarn carrier at the back right next to the mast, leaving some slack and making very certain that neither yarn is caught over a needle that it should not be. Whenever you change colors like this in mid-sock, it's a good idea for the first 2 rounds to keep a fingertip where the yarns join so that they don't get to slip, making elongated stitches that will tend to pop off of the needles. After that, you can kind of tug on the ends and get them to stay together. Now, 34 plain rounds for the sock top. Just as for my other video patterns, I'm going to go through the knitting skills rather fast, assuming that you know them, and will consult my other videos if you need help with them, and we'll focus on the numbers here. Since there is a total of 48 needles to the entire sock, we knit the heel and the toe on half of those needles, which is 24. So the other 24 go in the hole by coming all the way up as usual. We will short row in for 16 rows until after putting the final stitch up into hold, only 8 needles remain. After each short row, place the last needle that knitted into hold by lifting it. That's the all the way up position. The spring will hold it up. As always when knitting a heel, especially on a circular sock machine, placing weight directly below the needles that are knitting so that the pocket being formed does not allow them to become weightless and fail to knit off is extra important. It's important on most knitting machines, but on this particular variety, it's super important. And let me apologize now for the condition of my hands. It's gardening season, and I spent the morning doing things that stained them pretty badly even after a good scrub. Now, I found that using this heaviest yarn that the machine will basically manage, it was very difficult to knit off some of the stitches, but I found a trick for you. In this book, I show you how to make a couple of kinds of sock weights. If you will substitute a latch needle for the suggested fork in a couple of those weights. It will pinpoint the weight more precisely just below the end needle that's being knitted, and it makes all the difference. You can push the latch needle all the way up through until you can control the latch, get it hung exactly where you want it, see it pulling down on those end stitches, and then do the same on the other side. The fork is fine still for the center of the heel. There is much less resistance to knitting off the stitches using the needle weights than the fork weights because they're so precise. You do have to move them frequently because they need to be in the exact right position. But I think you can even see on camera how much more smoothly this heel is going using the needle weights. As always, after the narrowest point on the heel, we keep adding stitches back to work, one on the opposite side from the carriage, that is the yarn carrier, every row until 24 are back in work. You can expect it to be a bit stiff whenever the machine needs to knit off a wrap. However, it doesn't have to be this stiff. This particular piece of video was taken before I remembered to get out my needle weights. When the heel is complete, we return all of the cylinder needles to work and resume knitting in the round, remembering that they might need to be in a slightly upward knitting position in order to keep all the latches open this very first round. The foot rounds are what makes the length of the sock, so these are the rounds that will differentiate sock sizes from 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. I'm going to go ahead and give you a size 12 number of rounds, but I actually think that the majority of size 12 feet, men's size 12, will find the tube that this cylinder makes a little bit too small. However, long skinny feet do exist. This tube size will fit quite a lot of men and quite a lot of ladies, so I've done this chart a little bit differently. We're going to assume you're getting 7.25 rounds per inch as I am. The men's sizes these may fit are down the left side. Ladies' sizes in the United States may be the same length of feet, but named a different size. The skew is 2 whole sizes. So the length of a men's size 6 foot is the same as a lady's 8. So assuming that the tube size of this sock will fit the wearer, and we'll look at a man's size 8 or a lady's size 10, knit 39 rounds. If you're getting a different row gauge, a different number of rounds per inch, take the number that appears here. Numbers here are the actual foot lengths of the sizes given. Multiply the actual foot length times your actual row gauge. Subtract 32 because the toe and heel have already contributed that many rows, and that will give you the number of rounds to knit down the length of the foot. Knit those rounds, knit the toe just as the heel was knitted, change to waste yarn, and scrap off. With the socks off of the machine, graft the toe as usual, but then finish the hem by whip stitching the very first row of the hem to the very last row of the hem. It's important this area still be stretchy so that you can get the sock on. So periodically stop stitching and give a lengthwise tug to make sure that you are keeping it stretchy. When this is complete, the yarn tails may all be buried inside of the hem and the waste yarn removed. A written version of this pattern, including some alternate row gauges, will appear in Country Knitting of Maine News and Views.